Okay, going live in 3, 2, 1.
Do you have issues talking about your sex life? Does it feel weird even telling your doctor that you are either not having good sex, you want to have good sex, or you think you should be having good sex? Well, today, my good friend, Dr. Nita, you've all seen her on The Doctor. She's an OBGYN, and she is here to help us all figure out how to have better sex, how to have better health, and how to be better. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
I'm so excited to welcome today my friend, OBGYN and host of The Doctors, out with a new book, Dr. Nita's Crash Course for Women, Better Sex, Better Health, Better You. Good morning, Dr. Nita.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited about this book. First of all, because it has the word sex in it. And as much as you would think, as grown people in particular, even young adults, we see so much sex in movies. We see it on videotapes. It's in every song that's played on the radio. But yet there still seems to be this funky kind of taboo about talking openly with your friends, with your family members, with other adults about sex. Why do you think that is?
I think that somewhere along the way, people in society said, oh, this should be a taboo topic. And then they fed that lie to woman after woman after woman, generation after generation after generation. And we've all just kind of bought into it. So we are walking around overall with this mentality that respectable women don't talk about sex. They don't really enjoy sex, like all of these different things. And we need to change that narrative because it's not true and it's not okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking back. I'm Catholic. I grew up as a Catholic, and sex was all about procreation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you were having sex, it had to be between, a man and a woman in a marriage. And it was primarily to produce other little people. And that was it. And we know that, as this book so clearly illuminates, and let me get that word right, that is not why people predominantly are having sex. It's about more than just making babies and having children. So help us understand how we as women and even men can start talking about sex and the reality of sex, because it's not just about procreation.
The first thing that we need to do is just decide that this is not going to be a taboo topic anymore, right? Like, is it taboo to talk about diabetes or heart disease or like all of these other things? And right now, a lot of people are immediately thinking, oh, well, that's different. Well, why do you think it's different? You think it's different because you've been taught that it's different. Like, you have your physical health, you have your sexual health. And to be clear, Areva, well, a couple of things. First of all, it's Dr. Nita's Crash Course for Women. And I use the word woman, but I want to point out that sex assigned at birth does not correspond with how everyone identifies. So when I use the word she, her, woman, I want to make sure that individuals know that we're keeping that in mind. But on another note, we just have to say, this is the sex life that I want. And when you determine what type of sex life you want, then you figure out how to do that safely, like in a healthy way. And that's the type of sex life you should pursue. So what one person wants will be very different from what everybody else wants on this planet, potentially. But as long as they're doing it in a safe, respectable manner, I think that we should be open to having that conversation and open to allowing everyone to have the healthy, safe sex life that they want.
So, Dr. Nita, you're an OBGYN, so you treat predominantly women in your practice. Are women, when they come in to see you, are they more open about their sex life from a pleasure standpoint, not just, the health side of it? I imagine women come in if they think they're having issues, maybe they think they might have, I don't know, a disease or a condition, or maybe even cancer of the uterus or something. But what about women just coming into your practice saying, Dr. Nita, I'm not happy with my sex life. Like, I want to have better sex. Do you have patients coming in saying that to you?
Occasionally. but not very often. But here's the thing, Areva, if I bring it up in a, really just laid back, I'm not judging you. I just want to know if there's any way I can help you have the sex life you want. If I have that tone, then they're open to talking about it. And a lot of people assume that it's going to be 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds. I'll tell you, I've had people come in, they're 80 years old, even 90 years old. They come in with their child who's grown, and I say, "Are you sexually active?" And the child will say, "Oh, goodness, no." And then maybe the parent can't hear. They'll be like, "What'd you say?" And I'll say, "Are you sexually active?" And either they'll say, "Oh, I wish," or "Yeah." And then the child just kind of like, they're like, "Oh my goodness." So this is at all stages of life. And I think that's a good thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I have a lot of women over 50 that watch this show, and we're constantly in communication about the topics, and they weigh in a lot. Please debunk the myth about there is some age at which point women or men, there's some age cutoff for sexual activity.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As long as you are living and breathing and willing to consent, then you should have the sex life that you want. And some of my 60-something-year-old patients will come in and say they're having the best sex of their life. So I don't know. I mean, you don't limit yourself. Now, I will say, as someone transitions into menopause or when they're menopausal, sometimes there are issues that we need to address, such as vaginal dryness due to normal hormonal changes. And we can address that with vaginal lubricants, moisturizers, or vaginal estrogen. We can talk about all of those things. But if you're experiencing an issue and because of that issue, you're not having the sex life that you want, it's very important that you find a provider or find a healthcare clinician who's going to have an open, honest conversation with you in a non-judgmental way so that you can address that medical issue and move on with your sex life. You shouldn't be at home saying, "Oh, I want to have sex, but I have vaginal dryness, and because of that, I can't have sex anymore." Go to your doctor. Like, as an OBGYN, I literally went to school for this stuff. People, they don't surprise me. You're not going to go to your OBGYN and say something that's going to make them say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she wants to do that," or what have you. Like, yeah. And if you do feel judged when you go to the doctor, find another doctor.
Great advice. You're right, because oftentimes I think lay people, non-medical doctors, we are embarrassed sometimes to share information with our doctors for fear of judgment, for fear that, they will have a negative response. I know you're talking about vaginal dryness, and that, as you said, happens to some women as they go through menopause. What about libido changes? I hear a lot of women talk about the desire or lack of desire to have sex, either themselves or they find it with their partners if they are in, some kind of relationship as they go through menopause. How do you address that?
When it comes to sexual desire, this is another misconception that we really have to work on changing. People assume that sexual desire is supposed to be the same throughout their life, throughout their relationship. There are different types of sexual desire. You have what we call spontaneous desire, and you have responsive desire. When we talk about spontaneous desire, that's the type of desire that people frequently experience at the beginning of a relationship, when everything is new, when everything is fresh. And that's when you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get home and have sex with my partner." Or, you're standing at the grocery store, and I give an example in the book, and you're walking through the grocery store and you're trying to get orange juice, and you're like, what would go good with this orange juice? Some sex. It's that kind of thing. You just want it. But then as your relationship grows and develops, and maybe you have kids and you're dealing with in-laws and all of these other things.
Stress of adulting.
Yes, exactly. You may still want sex, but it's in a different way. A lot of times those individuals will experience responsive desire, which is when you say, what would go good with my orange juice at the store, it's donuts. It's not necessarily sex. You're not walking around thinking about it all of the time. However, if you have a strong relationship with your partner and you're willing to allow your partner to arouse you, meaning doing those things like kissing and hugging and, all of those things that may arouse you, then once your arousal reaches a certain level, then the desire kicks in. So basically with spontaneous desire, you experience desire and then you look for your partner so that you can experience arousal. Whereas with responsive desire, you allow your partner to arouse you and then you experience desire. The problem is we've been programmed to believe that that spontaneous desire is the only type of desire that exists, and that spontaneous desire is the only type of desire that is normal. And that is not true. It is very, very, very common for women to switch between the two, depending on what's going on in life. And also it's very common for women to predominantly have a responsive desire kind of sex style as opposed to spontaneous desire. So a lot of times just explaining that to women and allowing them to know that they are healthy and normal when they experience spontaneous desire is what they really needed to know, because they do experience that type of desire. It's just that they want to experience spontaneous desire all the time because they think that's the only type of desire that counts. They think that responsive desire is a second place prize, but that's not true. And research shows that responsive desire doesn't lead to better orgasms. So that has to count for something. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there an age limit, though, on responsive desire? Does a woman reach a certain age, say 70, 80, 90, where they no longer even have a responsive, arousal or desire to have sex?
Every person is going to be different as far as what they want. And I also want to point out, I'm talking about spontaneous desire and responsive desire, but it's also okay not to want sex at all. Mm-hmm. That's also okay. And that goes back to having the type of sex life that you want. Now, when it comes to spontaneous desire, responsive desire, and if someone doesn't have desire at all, then sometimes as people age, if they have certain medical conditions, sometimes, for instance, I'll go back to vaginal dryness just because that's a very common one. If someone has vaginal dryness, they may say, I don't experience responsive desire anymore. But the reason they don't experience responsive desire is because sex hurts. And not in a good way, like not in the way, like sex hurts. And because of that, it's not pleasurable to them. So if someone tries to arouse them, they're not going to reach that threshold to ignite the responsive desire. So in that case, it's about correcting that medical issue, the vaginal dryness, so that sex is pleasurable again for them and they won't be fearful of pain. Therefore, they can be aroused and then they can have that responsive desire ignited. But there's not an age cutoff saying, oh, once you're 85, forget it. You can forget it, girl. You're not ever going to want sex anymore. Like, absolutely not. And I will tell you, Areva, I've been to like assisted living facilities and things where we had to examine people and they had sexually transmitted infections and we had to have the talk with individuals who are older because a lot of people as they age, once they can't get pregnant, they don't want to wear condoms. They don't wear condoms. Yeah.
Yeah. We've heard about those condoms. We've heard about those cruise ships, like where there's the man and then there's like 10 women. And then when they get off the boat, there's like, 10 sexually transmitted diseases because that 70-year-old man has been very busy and very active with multiple women on that ship. So thank you for noting that even no matter what age you are, you need to be having responsible sex and thinking about sexually transmitted diseases, because that doesn't stop either as you are, 20 years old or 30 years old. Dr.
Exactly. Nita, tell grandma, don't forget the condoms.
Pack them on the cruise. This book is pretty thick. So I just want to ask you, how did you decide what topics to include? It's rich with so much great information. And as an OB/GYN has been practicing for, a while, I'm sure there's even more topics you could have included. So how did you narrow down the topics for the book?
I went with repeat offenders, the topics that kept popping up over and over and over in clinic, the topics that have a profound impact on a woman's health. Those are the ones I included.
Okay. And I know in each chapter, you also have a series of questions. Again, were these the questions that you get asked the most?
I went with those questions because certain questions have a higher probability of leading to answers that will allow you to improve your health overall. So those overall, like that's the reason that I went with those questions. But you're correct. The questions that I chose are ones that I get frequently, but I also included questions that people don't tend to ask. However, when I provide these explanations, I see that a light bulb goes off. And they say, oh, that's what that means. That's why that happens. That's how I can fix it. And those were the things that I really wanted to focus on.
What are some of the common misconceptions that women have about their sexual health? Because again, as you said, we're taught early on that women shouldn't even talk, little girls, and then we grow up as women, shouldn't talk about sex. So I would imagine consistent with that we're also taught some things about our sexual health that just aren't true. So what are some of those misconceptions?
Some of the misconceptions include, number one, the responsive versus spontaneous desire. We talked about that one. That's a huge one. Another one is that every pleasurable sexual experience requires an orgasm. Now, I'm not saying that you should run away from orgasms. You embrace them as they come to you. But when you talk to sex experts or you listen to reputable sex experts, a lot of them are encouraging people to focus on the whole sexual experience as opposed to just orgasms. And one of the best analogies I heard was about going to a restaurant. And the sex expert basically said, you know how if you go to a nice restaurant, you enjoy the whole experience. You walk in, you get bread, you get a meal, you eat your dessert, you walk out, you grab a mint, like all of those things. And all of that is considered the experience. Now, the dessert is great, but you can also have a pleasurable experience without the dessert. They equated sex to that analogy, and they basically said an orgasm is like the dessert, but you don't want to miss out on all of those other moments that happen during sex. And so that's important. And another thing is, when you put all the emphasis on orgasms, as women, a lot of times we'll fake it, because if you don't have an orgasm, people or the other person, your partner, just kind of has been trained to assume that the sex just didn't work out. It wasn't good sex. And so because of that, because we're caring human beings and we don't want to hurt our partner's feelings, we fake an orgasm. And that's unfortunate, because if you're in a healthy relationship, number one, your partner should want to please you. And if your partner wants to please you, but you're faking an orgasm, then why would they change what they're doing? Because they think that they're knocking it out of the park. Yeah. But also, if you're busy faking an orgasm, then you're taking power away from your partner, because you're not allowing them to then focus on the other pleasurable things that you are experiencing during, that you could experience during the encounter. So that's a couple of them. But we just have to change. We have to change our whole mentality. And I'll say one more thing as far as arousal. There are a lot of misconceptions about arousal, and your partner may not always say, oh, I noticed a lot of vaginal lubrication, so that means I know you're good to go. But vaginal lubrication doesn't always correspond to somebody's level of sexual arousal. And specifically, like in heterosexual relationships, if you have a man and a woman, the man may assume that arousal means, oh, you're good to go, but that's actually a physiologic response, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. So you really have to communicate.
Yeah, let's talk about orgasms. This is such a big topic, obviously, in the book and just in life. And you're right, there is this notion that if the sexual experience doesn't end in an orgasm, something's wrong with either person, right? Either the man didn't do his quote unquote job, or the man says there's something wrong with you, the woman, So how do we have that conversation with our partner when both, and again, we're talking heterosexual relationships now, when both come into that conversation with this notion that if I do what I'm supposed to do and you do what you're supposed to do, this orgasm thing is supposed to happen every time?
Why do we think an orgasm is supposed to happen every time?
That's what we've been taught, as people.
So how do we have to teach people something different? We have to have this conversation. And also, you have to realize that there's more to sex than an orgasm. Like, that's the whole conversation, right? A lot of women will have very satisfying sexual experiences because they enjoy the bonding that they experience with their partner during that. And we've been taught to put the orgasm on a pedestal when some women value that emotional connection as much as, or even more than, they value the orgasm. So you can't tell your partner what they should be valuing during a sexual encounter. And now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do things that's pleasing to your partner as long as you're willing to do those things. And I'm not saying that people should run away from orgasms. I'm just saying that we have to change our perception of what a quote unquote successful sexual session looks like. That's going to look different for different people. So you have to have a conversation with your partner so you can determine what they're trying to get out of the experience, and then you can move forward.
Well, given, Dr. Nita, that we know, men, the notion of an orgasm, or the notion that a man has the responsibility to please a woman in this sexual encounter, is such a part of it's so pervasive in our culture. How does a woman have that conversation with a man who comes into the relationship with that notion that he has this burden, this responsibility? How do you get the man to see what you just said, that it is okay if you don't have an orgasm, man, heterosexual man, and it's okay if me, female, heterosexual female, if I don't have an orgasm? I feel like this book, a lot of women are going to read your book, and then we're going to understand that. But where's the counterpart for the man who's been told all his life that, to be a stud, that you've got to please your woman with this orgasm, you got to have her, screaming and, talking in tongues or whatever men think that they have to do, to be successful. It feels like that's a lot for us as a woman to try to, dissuade them from what they have been taught pretty much all of their lives too.
It's about communication. It's about communication. And you should know, you know your partner, and you know the types of conversations they may be amenable to. I think it's about how you approach the topic. Number one, it's about how you approach the topic. But also, if you're having a problem having that conversation with your partner and you're in a committed relationship, sometimes maybe counseling or therapy is the right way to go. If you're having a hard time having difficult, quote unquote, difficult conversations, or I should say conversations that you deem difficult, bringing in another person to help you navigate that situation can also be beneficial in some instances.
I'm glad you mentioned that, bringing in a third person, bringing in an expert, because I know you dedicate a whole chapter in the book to finding Dr. Right. Tell us, what is some of the things that people are going to learn by reading the book about finding that right person, whether it's somebody to talk about your sex life or some, health issue that you may be having.
When it comes to finding the right doctor, it's going to be really, really, really important that you do your homework. Your health is very valuable. And I tell people, just like you may not automatically click with other individuals and want to form a friendship with them outside of, the clinic or whatever, just walking around in everyday life, it may be the same thing when you go to the doctor. Like, some relationships work and some relationships just don't. And if you're in a relationship that's just not working for you, my first tip would be to make sure you are actively looking for another provider. Make sure you're actively looking for another healthcare clinician. And the way you can do that is, number one, ask your friends. Like, that's going to be my first tip. Ask your friends. Or even if you're watching this, if you have a doctor you love, send your friends a text right now and say, hey, don't know if anybody's looking for a doctor, but I see such and such and I absolutely love them. And if you happen to be looking for a doctor and someone tells you that they love their doctor, the next thing you're going to want to do is say why. Why do you love them? Do you love them because they listen to you, because they allow you to ask as many questions as you want to ask, or like what makes you love them? And then you also want to ask what type of medicine they practice. And when I say that, I mean, some people are really into holistic healing. Some people are just like, take this pill and this is what I want you to do, or whatever. And if you're a person and you're into yoga and you're into acupuncture and you're really looking for a holistic approach, then you're not going to click with a doctor who just wants you to take a pill. So when you have that conversation with your friend, then ask them, how their doctor tends to lean. So that's going to be the other thing you want to do. And also you can go on Google and look at the medical board websites and see if the doctor has any lawsuits or anything like that. Now, one or two may not necessarily mean that it's a big red flag, but if you see something that's recurring, then that's something that you would want to pay attention to. So those are some of the things that you can do to find a doctor. And I will also say telemedicine is also a big benefit, because if you're looking for someone and you don't have access to someone that you're clicking with close by, then maybe you can schedule an appointment with somebody on the other side of the country and just kind of get their opinion. And they may also know someone who is closer to you that they would recommend for you.
Well, and you did say go on the website or go on Google to find a doctor, not to diagnose ourselves, which many of us do. We go to Google and we become many doctors ourselves. We think we've, taken all the years that you have in practice in school, and then we start giving ourselves all kinds of conditions, which, people tend to do. But how do we know, Dr. Nita, if we need to go to see you, an OBGYN? You mentioned sex expert. How do we know what kind of doctor to see? Is there something you can tell us that would help us decide? Because I don't think I saw an OBGYN until I was pregnant with my first child. My daughters, though, I think the both of them, they transition from pediatrician and they go to one probably has been to an OBGYN, I think, and the other one still goes to like a primary care doctor. So it's a little confusing. Like, when do we need someone like you? Because you're considered a specialty, right? An OBGYN is a specialist. So if I have certain kind of health insurance, I wouldn't naturally be going to you originally, would I?
A lot of times, if you have a certain type of health insurance, then the insurance company may require a referral to an OBGYN, but that's not always going to be the case. However, I would say, when it comes to an OBGYN versus a primary care doctor, if you're just trying to go to one of those, I would ask them, I would say, do you think I need to, if I'm at a primary care doctor's office, I would say, do you think I also need to see a gynecologist? If I'm at a gynecologist's office, I would say, do you think I also need to see a primary care doctor? In some cases, an OBGYN may do all of the things that a primary care doctor will do. In some cases, a primary care doctor, for instance, a family practice doctor, may be willing to check your blood pressure, check you for diabetes, do your pap smear, do your breast exam. They may do all the things that a primary care doctor and an OBGYN would do. And so it's about having a conversation with your doctor and saying, hey, I'm seeing you, but do I need to see this other type of doctor as well?
And that, I guess, brings me to a question I should have asked you at the beginning of the interview, which is, what does an OBGYN do? And how do you distinguish an OBGYN from a primary care doctor?
And OBGYN, the OB part stands for obstetrician. So we deliver babies. If a patient becomes pregnant, then we care for them throughout the entire pregnancy. We deliver the baby. And the GYN portion, the gynecology portion, deals with non-pregnant women. As a gynecologist, we do pap smears, we order mammograms, we do breast exams. If someone has heavy periods, or irregular periods if their periods are painful. So any period drama. We do a lot of birth control. We talk about PMS symptoms. And if someone has incontinence, we do some of that workup, although there is another specialty called urogynecology or urology that goes beyond the scope of OBGYN. So basically, the gynecologist will deal with women's health issues.
Okay. And are those practices ever split? I mean, is it the case that some doctors are just gynecologists and some are just obstetricians, or is it always a combined practice?
The way we do our medical training currently is you learn both. So once you finish medical school, you decide what type of residency you want to go to. For instance, if you want to be an internal medicine doctor, you go to this residency. If you want to be a family practice doctor, you go to a different one. If you want to be an OBGYN, you go to a different one, a surgeon, a different one. And so right now, OBGYN, obstetrician gynecologist, is combined. Now, once we finish our training, we can then decide what we want to do. And in some cases, people will say, you know what, I learned about OB and GYN. However, I only want to deliver babies. And that's what they'll go and do. Some people will say, I learned about both, but I only want to do GYN surgeries. I don't want to deliver babies. I want to do the other part, just the GYN part, and they'll do that. And, you know, some people are even more specialized. For instance, they may say, well, you know what? Not only do I only want to do gynecology, but within the scope of gynecology, I only want to focus on fibroids. I only want to focus on endometriosis. I only want to focus on these very specific things. So it can be very, very different. And looking at their website should give you some clue as to if they're saying they only want to do a certain thing. And then, of course, you can always call the clinic and say, hey, I have this issue. Is this a good place for me to come?
Yeah, and that's a great, way for, I think, great information for women to have, because we hear these terms, these medical terms, and we don't often know. Like I said, I don't think I went to an OBGYN until I was actually pregnant with my first child. Go ahead, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, we actually like to say hello to young people when about 13 to 15-ish. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be doing a pap smear or a pelvic exam or anything like that. We just like to say hello, and we talk about the HPV vaccine, which stands for human papillomavirus, to protect individuals from genital warts and cervical cancers caused by certain strains of HPV. And honestly, a lot of times I like to ask the parent to step out of the room if they're okay with that, and if the child is okay with that, so we can have an open, honest conversation. And, you know, I'm on team safe, right? So when you leave the room, that allows me to say, hey, this is a confidential conversation. Are you sexually active? Now, when you were in the room, they weren't sexually active. When you left the room, they were sexually active. And that gives me, a trained professional who really wants the best for them, an opportunity to have a conversation about safe sex. And even if they're not sexually active, it allows me, a trained professional, to give them information that will help keep them safe whenever they do choose to have intercourse or have sex. And that's important because there are a lot of misconceptions. For instance, some people don't think that oral sex is sex, but there are risks that go along with getting or receiving oral sex. So it allows me to have that conversation with them. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out.
That's so important, because I think, again, as parents, we don't necessarily know what age to think, those of us that have daughters, we should be thinking about having them see a gynecologist, because you're right, kids at 11, we know, can get pregnant. We've seen that horrific case of the girl who was pregnant who needed an abortion, or at least her parents wanted her to have an abortion. So we should not assume that this is something that happens to women like me by the time you're pregnant and you're married. No, I should have been seeing someone a lot sooner, and that doesn't happen in a lot of communities. But I'm glad that you are not just the author of a book, but you are also on television, and you've combined your medical career with entertainment and TV, and that allows you to talk, to a much broader audience than you would just, in your medical practice. So why did you make that choice to combine medicine with an entertainment career?
Okay, before I answer that, can I just add one more thing to your last question? Because I think it's a really important topic, and I'm glad we're hitting on it. Sometimes people think that talking to kids about sex is like promoting sex. It is not. having a talk about abstinence being the only way to guarantee that you're not exposed to sexually transmitted infection, and letting them know that abstinence is the only way to, ensure that you don't become pregnant and all of these other things. That's part of a larger conversation. So we also talk about the benefits of abstinence. It's just about an overall education. So I just wanted to make sure
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because I have a friend who's dating a guy who has a 12, I think she's 12 or 13-year-old, and she asked the guy if he had the talk with his daughter. He says, "Oh my God, no, she's only 12." And my friend's like, "Are you kidding me? She's only 12." So there is still this misconception that the conversation about sex should happen with much older teenagers, rather than a recognition that you should be talking to kids about sex really young, at appropriate developmental language. But the notion that the sex conversation should happen, with later teens is really not a wise way to raise.
Right. Because if you love that child more than anybody on this planet, you want to be able to guide that conversation, or you want to be able to pair them with someone like a gynecologist who can assist you with that. You don't want them getting the information from their friends or from people on the internet and pornography industries who are targeting kids or things like that. You want to have input. And so you want to make sure if they're old enough to ask questions, they're old enough to get, like you said, age appropriate answers.
Yeah, I had Gabrielle Blair on the show a couple of weeks ago, and she wrote a book about ejaculating responsibly. And she says she talks to her kids. She started talking to her kids about sex and ejaculations at as early as 6 and 7, again, using age appropriate language. And she said the reason is because it's sex is everywhere. It's in every movie. It's in, music. And as much as you try to have your kids only watch G-rated programming, the reality is they're getting input from so many different sources, including friends at school who are maybe more advanced. So you want to be ahead of those conversations. So, okay, back to you in entertainment. Why combine your medical career with entertainment?
I was just always interested in both. I wanted to be a doctor, and when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a quote unquote TV person. And so I just decided that I wanted to do both. I will say I got a little pushback. And so I kind of kept the entertainment dream to myself. And I pursued my medical degree. And then once I finished, I became a traveling doctor, got a lot of great experience, and ended up being in the Midwest one winter. I'm originally from the South, so it was very cold. And I was watching TV, and the weather person said, it's colder here than it is in the North Pole. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound pleasant. Like, this is not, like, I don't know. So I put in my 30-day notice at work, and I bought a plane ticket to Los Angeles, moved here, took some classes, and I went for it, and it worked out. So now I was able to combine my two passions, entertainment and medicine.
And in doing so, and you talk about that in the book, in the beginning of the book, you actually share your journey of, combining your love for medicine with also your desire to work in entertainment. What has that allowed you to do? Being a host, being a medical correspondent, being able to address medical issues, on a broader platform. How has that impacted your medical practice?
It has allowed me to be happy as an individual, because I do get to combine my passions. But just as far as practicing medicine, I'm grateful for a platform that allows me to, reach women around the world, as opposed to just in a clinic. Not that it's wrong to be in a clinic, because I also work in the clinic and in the hospital and things. But it just puts a different spin on it. And I get messages from people who live in Africa, or people around the world, people who may not have access to the best healthcare. And I'm able to share information on social media with them. I'm able to share information in my book with them, so that they have, the answers to questions that haven't been answered to their satisfaction.
And that's so great, because you're right. We assume that everybody lives in a big city and that everybody has access to great healthcare. And we know that that is absolutely positively not true. There are probably the majority of the people in the U.S. live in rural communities or small towns. And many people don't have access to, good, high quality medical care, and they may not have an opportunity to get a referral to a specialist like you. So I'm so happy that you are able to speak to millions of women all over the universe, as you said, about issues that, affect their health, affect their sex life, because some of those women and, men wouldn't otherwise have access to that information. And I want to ask you before I let you go about the subtitle of your book is Better Sex. We've talked a lot about that, but it's also Better Health, Better You. What are a few things in the book that you share that immediately can help someone have better health? Because, we know without our health, none of it matters. No matter what you achieve in your career, it doesn't matter if you don't have good health.
One big tip I would give individuals watching this is to really take a step back and determine if you've been tolerating things that you shouldn't be tolerating. For example, when it comes to periods, there are lots of people walking around with very painful or very heavy periods, but they have been told, oh, it's normal, or they just think it's normal because that's the only period they've ever had. Like they're suffering. And because they think it's normal, they've given up on looking for ways to correct it. If you're having issues such as a heavy period or a painful period, and I'm stressing that because it's a big deal for a lot of patients that I see, I would say if your doctor isn't giving you the answers that you need to feel better, get a second opinion. Get a third opinion. Don't stop advocating for your health. And that brings me to the second one. When you show up to the doctor, advocate for yourself. Are we busy? Yes. But I will tell you that honestly, there is a big difference in the way different practices set up their schedules. And unfortunately, a lot of times in marginalized communities, the patient load is like through the roof. Yeah. And so your doctor's running around, you're sitting here like with 2 maxi pads and a tampon on, and you feel as though your heavy period is not you feel as though you can't take the time to talk to them because they're so busy.
Right.
Don't feel like that. Like we're literally there to help you. If somebody's walking out of the room, and you're at a doctor's appointment, somebody's walking out of the room and you feel like your issues have not been addressed, say, excuse me, I'm really having this heavy period, for example. I'm really concerned about my health, and I honestly don't quite understand what the plan is to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. Now, at that point, they should then tell you something that would allow you to know that you are moving in the right direction as far as getting the proper diagnosis and getting a treatment. So I say that to say the second tip is advocate for yourself. And even when we're busy, make sure that you are vocalizing your concerns and you are saying, hey, I'm here. This is my time. Let's have this conversation.
Dr. Nita, I've heard some people say that they've been at a doctor's office and say that the appointment is to discuss the heavy period. And they've had that conversation with the doctor, but yet they have another issue, like maybe they feel a lump in their breast or they've had pain in their breast. And as they try to address that second issue, a doctor will say, I have you scheduled to talk about your periods. You're going to have to make a second appointment to come back in to talk about the breast issue. How do you deal with that? If a doctor says, look, you're here for A, we're only going to talk about A. If you want to talk about B, C, D, and E, you've got to call and get yet a second appointment, which we know with some busy practices, that may be 30, 45, 60 days later. So give us a tip of how to tell a busy doctor, no, I need to talk about A, B, and C in this appointment, not just A.
When you call to make your appointment, you can say, these are my complaints. I have heavy periods and I have a breast in my lump. Am I going to be able to address both of those issues at this appointment? If the person says yes, say, okay, please write it down in my chart that is what the visit is for. And then when you go, you can say, no, I called and I specifically asked about having an appointment for these 2 issues. The other tip I would give is when you walk in to your appointment and you're ready to see the doctor, don't bury the lead. don't just talk about the painful period. And then when the doctor turns to leave, say, oh, and by the way, I have a lump in my breast. I would say, hey, doctor, whoever, yeah, why are you here today? I'm here to discuss my period and a lump in my breast. And I was told that we would be able to discuss both. Like, let them know why you're there initially. And then that also increases the probability that they would be willing to split the time appropriately so that both issues can be addressed. But I would definitely say when you call, ask about that. And also know sometimes if you really have a lot of issues, unfortunately, depending on what practice you're in, they may not be able to address everything at the same time. But if you have a lot of issues, maybe they can start to work up on all of them, and then, you can go from there. But hopefully they won't make you come back for every single issue. Yes, you can find another doctor. Not every doctor will make you do that.
Yeah, we know, sadly, in some underserved communities, under-resourced communities, that's the reality of medical care in our country, which is a whole nother topic about the inadequacy of it. But I do want to ask you finally about the Better You part. I just love that the book is, at the heart of it, it's about you personally having, a better life. So what in this book is going to really help people have a better, that you part of the subtitle, which I love so much? Give us a couple of tips that we're going to learn when we all go out and buy Dr. Nita's Crash Course for Women, because it's around the holidays. So everybody wants to feel happy and better about themselves. And tell us what they're going to learn in the book that's going to make them have a better you.
The Better You portion, number one, when we talk about better sex, that's going to help. So all of the tips and tricks there. And then as far as the health part, I think when you start to read some of the chapters and you realize that you have been tolerating some things that you shouldn't be tolerating, and you realize that there are practical solutions or even easy solutions in some cases to some of those issues that have been taking away from the quality of your life, then that's going to bring you a lot of joy, and it's going to help you to be the healthiest, happiest version of yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nita. Again, the book is Dr. Nita's Crash Course for Women, Better Sex, Better Health, Better You. It's available everywhere books are sold. Anything, last tip, Dr. Nita, you want to share with us? I guess I didn't ask you, and I want to know, why did you write this book? It's such an important topic, often not talked about topic. So why did you decide that in this moment you would write this book and share all of this great information, with millions of people around the world?
I wrote this book because I wanted to dispel some common myths. I wanted to, like I said before, hit on the repeat offenders. And I just really wanted to allow women to have the information that they needed, the information that I give my friends and family when they call to tell me that they're having medical issues. I wanted to give them this information so that they can live healthy, happy lives.
Well, thank you for sharing that and allowing us to be a part of your girlfriend and family circle, because that's what we will feel like, or you will feel like when you buy the book. You'll feel like you're talking to Dr. Nita. You're on a couch someplace, you're asking her some questions, and you're getting that advice that you may not get at your doctor's office. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Nita, for joining me, and best of luck to you. Have a fabulous holiday season. If I don't get to see you, happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Same to you. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to thank Dr. Nita so much for joining me this morning. Make sure you pick up this book. This is the perfect book for you. It's the perfect book for your partner. It's the perfect book for your daughters, your sons too. Even though it's a crash course for women, there's so much good information in here, I think, even for guys, because if a guy's going to be in a relationship with a woman, I think there's great information in here that even he should know. Christmas is coming up, so think about all of those people on your Christmas list who you think would just enjoy and would be just so happy to have information, opportunity to learn about how they can have better sex and better health. I'm super excited that Dr. Nita is sharing this information with not only her patients that she sees in clinic, but with women and men that she gets to talk to all over this nation through her appearances on television, through her social media platform, and now through her book, Dr. Nita's Crash Course for Women. So make sure you pick it up. And my words to live by, you've heard me say this over and over again, and I'm going to keep saying it because I truly believe it to my core, that your health is your wealth. And when you take good care of your health, you are wealthier, just by definitions. Be safe out there. And remember, we're all in this together.